Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. It's Tuesday the 14th of June. I'm Andrew Wilson and this is Scotland at 7. This evening I have the latest daily update from Ukraine on day 111 of the illegal Russian war of aggression. Then I'll introduce our guest for this evening, and then together we will take a look at today's headlines from Scotland and around the world. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has said the intense battle for Severodonetsk is taking a terrifying toll on Ukraine. The human cost of this battle is very high for us. It is simply terrifying. The battle for the Donbass will, without doubt, be remembered in military history as one of the most violent battles in Europe, he said in an address to the nation late on Monday. All three bridges to the embattled eastern city of Severodonetsk have been destroyed, according to the governor of the Luhansk region, Serhiy Haidai. In a video update, Haidai said that Russia had not completely captured the city, and a part of the city was under Ukrainian control. Russian artillery was hitting an industrial zone where 500 civilians were sheltering in the eastern Ukrainian city, Haidai added. Ukrainian troops in the city must surrender or die, a Russian-backed separatist leader in the self-proclaimed Republic in Donetsk has warned. Russia's Ministry of Defense has again claimed today that surrendering Ukrainian forces in the Donbass have been fired on by their own side, in a move it described as the Kyiv nationalist regime is trying to stop the retreat and surrender of its units by punitive actions of detachments. The claims have not been independently verified. The deputy head of the Russian-imposed military-civilian administration of the occupied Kherson region in Ukraine, Kirill Stremusov, has said it will remain Russian forever. Ukrainian authorities said they discovered a new mass grave of civilians near Bucha in the Kyiv region. Investigators exhumed 7 bodies from the makeshift graves in a forest outside the village of Forzel, less than 10 kilometres from Bucha. The UK Ministry of Defence has issued its daily assessment of the situation on the ground in Ukraine, suggesting Russia's operational main efforts remain the assault against the Severodonetsk pocket in the Donbass, and its western group of forces have likely made small advances in the Kharkiv sector for the first time in several weeks. Ukraine has called on the West to supply 300 rocket launchers, 500 tanks, and 1,000 howitzers before a key meeting on Wednesday. The request was made publicly by Mikhailo Podolyak, a key presidential advisor, amid concern in some quarters it is pushing its demands for NATO standard weapons to the limit. President Zelensky accused the German Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, of being too concerned about the repercussions his support for Ukraine would have for Berlin's ties with Moscow. Russia has earned €93 billion in revenue from fossil fuel exports in the first 100 days of the war, according to research by Finland's Centre for Research on Energy and Clean Air. With 61% of these exports, worth €56 billion, going to the member states of the European Union, the bloc of countries remains Russia's largest export market. And more than 15,000 millionaires are expected to flee Russia this year as wealthy citizens turn their back on Putin's regime. That's according to analysis of migration data by the London-based firm Henley & Partners. Now, we are lucky enough to be joined this evening by Martin Docherty-Hughes MP. Since he was elected as the SNP MP for West Dunbartonshire, which of course includes Clydebank, in 2015, Martin has been a member of the SNP Westminster Group Defence Team, and since 2019, the 2019 general election, has been a member of the UK Parliament Defence Committee. He's also the SNP spokesperson at Westminster on industries of the future and blockchain technologies. Martin, good evening. It's great to see you. How are you keeping?
Not too bad, Andrew. We changed there, no longer on Defence Select Committee, so I handed that over to somebody else. Got a wee bit of light relief for myself for a while. But good to join you, and thanks for inviting me on.
Well, it's always a pleasure, and thank you for joining us this evening. Our first story this evening is that setting out the fresh case for Scotland to become an independent country began today, as the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, declared it's time and published new analysis showing the prize of independence is a wealthier, fairer Scotland. The Scottish Government analysis, Independence in the Modern World, Wealthier, Happier, Fairer, Why Not Scotland, details how neighbouring countries such as Sweden, Ireland, Denmark and Finland use their powers of independence to achieve economic success, business dynamism and fairer societies. The evidence shows that the comparator countries are all wealthier, some a lot wealthier than the UK. Income inequality is lower in all of the comparator countries. Poverty rates are also lower in all of the comparator countries. There are fewer children living in poverty in all of the comparator countries. The comparator countries all have higher productivity, often significantly higher than the UK, and business investment tends to be higher in all of the comparator countries. It is the first in a series of papers called Building a New Scotland that will together form a prospectus for an independent Scotland to enable people to make an informed choice about Scotland's future before any referendum takes place. The First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, said, "Today, Scotland, like countries across the world, faces significant challenges, but we also have huge advantages and immense potential. The refreshed case for independence is about how we equip ourselves to navigate the challenges and fulfil that potential now and in the future." In their day-to-day lives, she continued, people across Scotland are suffering the impacts of the soaring cost of living, low growth and increasing inequality, constrained public finances, and the many implications of a Brexit we did not vote for. These problems have all been made worse, or most obviously in the case of Brexit, directly caused by the fact we are not independent. So at this critical juncture, we face a fundamental question. Do we stay tied to a UK economic model that consigns us to a relatively poor economic and social outcomes, which are likely to get worse, not better, outside the EU? Or do we lift our eyes with hope and optimism and take inspiration from comparable countries across Europe? The Scottish Government Minister and Scottish Green Party co-leader Patrick Harvie said, "This paper sets out a detailed, evidence-based assessment of how the UK performs in comparison to a group of European countries. It shows how we are being held back environmentally, socially and economically by a UK government that does not have the interests of the people of Scotland in mind. And it also shows that with the powers of independence, we could make different decisions than those made by the UK government and build a more prosperous, equal and greener Scotland." So, Martin, there's a great deal to unpick from such a big story this morning, and so we'll take it one bit at a time. One effect that struck me immediately of the First Minister's step is to reawaken some of the zombie arguments from 2014. I heard Nadeem Zahawi this morning tell us that the 2014 vote was agreed by everyone to be a once-in-a-lifetime event. And even Liz Truss has been having her say too. I might have thought that she would have been a bit busy dispatching flights to Rwanda today. But anyway, do you think that these zombie arguments that are working back into life are going to get anywhere with voters this time around?
I don't, Andrew. I think the First Minister and the Scottish Government who are releasing the papers, it's basically a stroke of genius, I think, in terms of setting the future agenda of the debate, because it's not the better, getting back the broken better together team. It's the Scottish Government leading with a range of papers over a period of time and, setting out what Scotland can achieve if it chooses to as an independent sovereign state. And I think it does put unionist cause on foot, because they come up with the reality that the UK, some of the lowest growth across the OECD. I think the stats were the other day that it's only beaten by the Russian Federation, which is going under extreme pressure due to sanctions for its illegal invasion of Ukraine. A pound that's collapsing because of its Brexit shenanigans, and The real opportunity now is for those who believe in independence is not only to take these papers, but the well-known arguments about why Scotland should be an independent country onto the doorsteps of our country and win the argument on facts.
Thanks, Martin. The First Minister told journalists it is the parties opposed to independence and only them who would benefit from doubt about the process. Those parties don't want to engage on the substance of this debate because they know how increasingly threadbare their arguments are. Their only hope is to cast doubt on the process. And she went on to talk about how the next referendum must be lawful. So, do you think, was that a way of the First Minister distinguishing Holyrood from Downing Street, given how keen the UK government seems to be on law breaking at the moment?
I think it was the First Minister doing their job. It was the First Minister making it clear that their government will seek to implement a legal referendum and international standards and seek to allow the people of Scotland to have the fulfilment of the mandate that the Scottish Parliament has, having a pro-independence supermajority. So I think the UK Parliament, specifically the Conservative Party, is slightly distracted at the moment, and I think they see this as another calamity that's coming their way, and there's probably absolutely nothing they can do about it. But to fill in the gap, to fill basically the silence and the tumbleweed moments that they're going through a lot at the moment, that they're coming out with the same old. And I don't see it, picking up any traction at all on the doorsteps, whether it be in Western Bartonshire, from Dumbarton to the Vale or Clydebank or anywhere else in Scotland.
Absolutely, Martin. And while it might be that unionists will now drone on endlessly about process because they've got nothing else meaningful to say uh, about anything of substance, do you think does their other approach, the what you might call the Grange Hill argument of just say no, does that emphasise the point that there is apparently no positive case for the union?
Well, if there's no positive case for the union, they're going to have to deal with that. My job as a member of the Scottish National Party, my job as someone who's been elected 3 times in a yes constituency, is to consistently make the argument as to why Scotland has to be an independent country, and that choice lies solely with the people of Scotland resident in Scotland. So I'll leave, the unionist cause to its own devices. I certainly don't know what's going on in their head, other than the fact that that Boris Johnson is probably the greatest advocate, or what's the term I'm looking for here? He's
Recruiting
converting
sergeant.
more people to the recruiting sergeant. I should remember that from my Defence Select Committee days. He's the greatest recruiting sergeant for the liberty and freedom of our country that's come along since who knows when. It's a gift that keeps on giving. And that's not just making a political or constitutional point. It is the political reality that Boris Johnson, in so many ways, doesn't really fit the political narrative at home, because in many ways, as the First Minister said today, that so much nation building has already taken place, not just since the referendum or the independence referendum, but also since the beginning of devolution itself. We are now a completely different state in that sense. We always have been a different country, no matter what the Tory party would like to say. But we are now really a state in waiting, and there's more work to be done. And I think the First Minister was clear that we'll get on with the job at hand, and that the Tory party can keep chasing its tail.
Yeah. And finally, Martin, on this item, as the First Minister has very much has said that she has been setting the scene for the next independence referendum today, as an independent supporter and as an elected representative, elected on behalf of the through the SNP. What would you like to see happen next as the next step following the scene setting today?
I would like to see members now from my own party, and also probably for the Greens, and even those in, for example, other parties in the Scottish Parliament who might agree with independence, to start getting involved again now as we're leaving the pandemic. Get back to your branches and prepare the case for why Scotland should be an independent nation state in the family of nations. It's clear that so much work is getting done by the Scottish Government, and that we need to pick up this information and educate ourselves once again, invigorate ourselves and the debate, and re-engage across the length and breadth of Scotland. And at least if you remember the SNP or from the Scottish Green Party, get back to your branches and get reinvigorated and participate. I think we've probably done ourselves in with Zoom. So let's reinvigorate ourselves if you feel safe enough and get back out there talking to our fellow Scots about why Scotland, given this case, which is building on the white paper from 2014, to be an independent nation once again.
Thanks, Martin, and you make a good point about activists and campaigners coming together in person again. And I know that there have been a couple of events already this month, and I know that there are lots of other events being planned for later on in the summer. So we're all looking forward to them. But we'll move on to the next item now, because Boris Johnson's ethics advisor has said it was reasonable to suggest the Prime Minister may have breached the ministerial code when he was fined during the Partygate scandal. Giving evidence to MPs, Christopher Geidt suggested that he did not have the power to investigate Johnson's potential breach linked to lockdown parties, and that he had not requested an investigation, but instead he had required a statement from the Prime Minister, who of course cleared himself of any breach. Lord Geidt was reported to be on resignation watch after Johnson wrote to him clearing himself of breaching the ministerial code over Partygate, after the advisor said that there was a legitimate question about whether he had done so. Amid controversy over Johnson's changes to the ministerial code, Geidt told the committee he now had enhanced powers, which he believed gave him the power to initiate investigations into the Prime Minister. I'm glad to get the new power, and I'm not going to be restrained from using it where necessary, but my powers were less clear in the previous period, he said. Giving evidence to MPs on Tuesday, Geidt appeared to cast doubt on the independence of his role because of the necessity of reporting directly to the Prime Minister. He said there was a standing question about the constitutional basis of the role, which he said was assisting the Prime Minister in the business of managing his own ministers. Geidt, who has been in office through multiple public scandals, including the Wallpapergate saga over donations to Johnson's Downing Street flat, as well as breaches of lockdown rules through parties in Downing Street and elsewhere, drew laughter from committee members when he said it had been an exceptionally busy year. So, Martin, firstly, Johnson's ethics advisor said it was reasonable to suggest that the Prime Minister may have breached the ministerial code. But that's the very heart of the issue here. The Prime Minister isn't a reasonable person. So applying the test of what a reasonable person would or wouldn't do won't inhibit Johnson in any way. It's pointless. And I suspect Johnson likely knows it.
Maybe I would be more curt with my language on it. What I would say is that this is very much the way the Westminster Parliament works. And this is it. I mean, this is how this place. I mean, look around you. It's got strawberry wallpaper that probably cost £1,000 a sheet. I mean, it's extraordinary. Um, and I'm amazed at how sometimes people are surprised at how a British Prime Minister can act in this fashion, can get away with acting in this fashion critically during the situation in the pandemic, and appoints the person to investigate them. Makes the final decision about the ministerial code, the same ministerial code that also covered people like Tony Blair and everybody else. I think we need to be aware, and that again, it's part of for me, the narrative as to why Scotland needs to be an independent country with a clear constitutional position, a written constitution, rules and regulations for parliamentarians and how we work more clearly defined, is that here in Westminster, this is what you get. This is the Westminster system, and I'm often beguiled as to why people find it so bizarre and strange. And I think, well, where's everybody been for the last 300 years? Because this is the way the Westminster works, and it's that whole kind of unwritten rule that you can change the rules when you like it. And guess what? That's what the Prime Minister is doing with the ministerial code. It is extraordinary, but it's certainly not a surprise. And whether that be Boris Johnson or anybody else, it was always open to that manipulation by a sitting Prime Minister.
Of course, Martin. Thank you. And just very briefly, Sir Christopher Geit said that the past year had been exceptionally busy. Given the way in which this government appears to operate, do you think that next year will be even busier for him?
Well, I suppose there's no limitations on how we gather in private or public places. So I think it will certainly be more problematic in terms of information that might come out about the Tory party and where it gets its money. We've yet to see the full implementation of the Russia report and the machinations of the Conservative Party. Scottish limited partnerships, of course, which are reserved to Westminster, are not yet being reformed, even though the Conservative Party has said so. We've also seen the Aaron Banks case against Carol Carwara the other day, which was a tremendous judgment on her behalf and standing up against what I would call Putin's money flooding into the Conservative and Unionist Party. So, yeah, there's probably more to come. And I think the Prime Minister's ethics advisor would be well to maybe read up on what it means to be a Scottish limited partnership and how that funds the Prime, possibly funds the Prime Minister and their political party.
Completely, Martin. That's a very good point. Thank you. We'll move on to the next item, though, because Liz Truss has been accused by the UN's refugee chief of making untrue statements after claiming that critics of the UK government's Rwandan removals policy have failed to come up with alternative policies. Filippo Grandi, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, said the Foreign Secretary was wrong because the UN had offered many, many suggestions, instead of sending people to the East African state, which he says violates the fundamental principles of refugees. The clash comes as the government prepares to send the first flight of asylum seekers to Rwanda this evening. Government sources said the plane was prepared to take off with a single refugee on board if necessary, because the costs, estimated at £500,000, cannot be reimbursed. Government insiders are concerned that there could be fewer than 5 people on the flight, following a flurry of last-minute legal challenges. Since last week, the number of refugees due to be on the flight has fallen from 130 to 7 earlier today. Speaking at a press conference in Geneva, Grandi said that the UN had advised that the UK could finalise agreement with countries of transit through which refugees travel and strengthen burden sharing between European countries. He advised the UK government to work with the EU to solve the problem. Cooperation is possible without resorting to this type of arrangement, such as the one with Rwanda, that, and I won't repeat this anymore because I've said it many times, violates the fundamental principles of refugees, he said. In a letter to the Times, the Archbishops of Canterbury and York, as well as the other 24 bishops that sit as Lords Spiritual in the House of Lords, said the policy should shame us as a nation. The policy has also drawn widespread condemnation from beyond the Church of England, where the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, said it could not stand the judgment of God. Prince Charles was reported to have privately described the plan as appalling. Care for Cali, one of the charities that brought the defeated legal appeal to halt the flight, said that just 7 migrants expected to be removed, but they were expecting to be removed, still had live tickets. Claire Mosley, the head of the charity, said that the government could not explain why the policy would work. Why is our government so very determined to spend so much taxpayer money on a brutal plan that shames us all and sends refugees to Rwanda, she asked. So, Martin, a broad question, first of all, before we look at a little bit of the detail round about this. I'm reminded this afternoon that Johnson's family name was Kamal because the family were from Turkey. Priti Patel's family were from Uganda. Dominic's Raab family are Czech. Rishi Sunak's family came to the UK from East Africa. Sajid Javid, originally his family are from the Punjab. Kwasi Kwarteng's family are from Ghana, and Nadim Zahawi's family originally are from Iraq. So all of these government ministers are immigrants or children of immigrants. So why do they seek to punish today's refugees and immigrants in such a cruel way? Oh, can you hear me, Martin? Martin, can you hear me now? I'm sorry, I think we've maybe
I
a
don't
problem
have
with.
to say anything to do with her, but I very much clearly part. Yes, I can.
Good. Did you
Yep.
did you hear my question, Martin?
Yep.
Go on then. Why does this current cabinet seek to punish today's refugees in such a cruel way?
Well, hear me. Let's see if this
We've got
helps. Yeah, yeah.
good. All right. Yes, Martin. I was just saying that so many of the current Tory cabinet are themselves recent immigrants or are the children of recent
Yep.
immigrants.
Yep.
The Prime Minister from Turkey, Priti Patel, Dominic Raab, Sajid Javid, Kwasi Kwarteng, Nadim Zahawi, to name a few. Why do they seek to punish today's refugees in such a cruel way?
Well, as I was saying, and I hope you can hear me.
Can you hear
I
now?
don't think. Yeah, I don't think that has the relevance to their positions. I think what is here is a very well-trodden path for conservative politicians around, trying to blame others for the economic woes and, the foibles of everyday life, that people might experience and want to blame others. And I think the Conservative Party, more than others, finds it easy to fall into that trap. I noted that you mentioned the Church of England, but you didn't mention the Church and Nation Committee, which in many ways it was the bulwark against which kept our country very distinct, and also was a major player in setting up devolution, or for example, also the Archbishop of Glasgow, who have both, I
Hmm.
believe, come out and denounced the UK government's position. And critically, given this has been made, this flight today, but I don't know if it's actually going ahead at the moment. I believe there may only be, if it does go ahead today, there might only be two people on it. But it's also happening, I think we must also be clear, on the anniversary of Grenfell. And I just find that appalling in so many other ways. Because on one hand, we are rightfully welcoming so many people fleeing, well, not welcoming as many as we should be from Ukraine, those fleeing the illegal invasion of Ukraine by the Russian Federation. But on the other hand, we're absolutely abdicating our responsibility for those fleeing the terror and horrors of Syria and Afghanistan, critically Afghanistan, where we left so many people who worked with the UK government and UK allies for many years, and we're sending them to Rwanda. I just find that extraordinary, and it does, quite frankly, seem as though if your face fits, you're welcome. That is, that you're white and European, and I just beggars belief for to sit here and listen in Westminster about welcoming the world, yet unless you're an Afghan or a Syrian, and yeah, it just seems to be unethical. It is unethical and morally repugnant, at least from my perspective.
Understandably so, Martin. Thank you for that. And apologies for the break in the connection there for a few minutes, but we seem to be back and running just now. I was going to ask you about the lining the events today of the planned departure of the flight to Rwanda and the commemoration of the catastrophe at Grenfell happening on the same day. So we'll come back to that at the end of the program if we've got time. But our next item is that for February to April 2022, Scotland's estimated employment rate rose over the quarter to 75.5%, while the estimated unemployment rate fell to a joint record low of 3.2%. Separate HMRC early estimates show that there were 2.42 million payrolled employees in Scotland in May 2022. That's 37,000 more than in February 2020, prior to the pandemic. With the low unemployment rate and higher vacancies compared to before the pandemic in some sectors, some parts of the labour market are experiencing labour shortages. In 2022-23, up to £113 million has been allocated by the Scottish Government to employability services, including £60 million for the No One Left Behind and additional investment in the Parental Employability Support Fund, and tackling child poverty. The Scottish Government are also continuing to invest in employability and training to support young people through the Young Persons Guarantee, and those who face barriers to employment through the National Employability Service, which is called Fair Start Scotland. Commenting on the latest labour market statistics, the Employment Minister Richard Lochhead MSP said, with the unemployment rate falling over the quarter to a joint record low of 3.2%, and the employment rate increasing by 1 percentage point, the resilience of the Scottish economy is clear. While today's figures show a strong recovery in Scotland's labour market, we continue to face economic challenges with the rising cost of living, the continued impact of Brexit, and recovery from the effects of the pandemic and the economic consequences of Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine. He continued, the Scottish Government is firmly focused on delivering the ambitious National Strategy for Economic Transformation, which will help us build an economy of secure, sustainable, and satisfying jobs. A key part of this strategy is to provide people with the skills they need to gain new opportunities, and to ensure new and current businesses are supported in investing in innovative ideas that could lead to new industries and quality jobs across the country. So, Martin, firstly, unemployment remains at relatively low levels historically, but so do wages and so does productivity. So, taken together, does that perhaps indicate that a decade of Tory austerity has brought the UK economy to its knees?
Yes. I think I, people can say, we have this. The government keeps going on about, and I think we need to be very realistic about some of the figures around unemployment falling, and it's very welcome. But we have to be very consistent in saying to the UK government, that's great, but at the end of the day, we're not seeing, it was especially with inflation now at nearly, after 4 decades, at its highest in nearly 4 decades, possibly moving this year to 10%. And I get scared if it starts to go above that because that's gone back to like 1974. I mean, I am that old, just old enough to remember people being worried about 15% in inflation and the impact, long-term impact in the economy. And I think what concerns those of us in Scotland is that we do not have the fiscal ability to counteract some of the major manufacturing and policy issues around growth that the UK government has full control over. And we have seen in recent days that the economic forecasting is for a dip. I mentioned that earlier on, that we're only going to be second to the Russian Federation and everything they've gone through. And that's not because today the First Minister's launched the independence campaign. It's not just because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and also because the pandemic. It's because of so many failures at UK policy level over a long period of time, not to promote economic growth, not to create a cohesive plan around manufacturing and industrial infrastructure. It's really interesting when I'm down here in the House of Commons, when you listen to radio broadcasts, for example, down here, consistently saying that the government, the UK government, is at fault here, and we need to hear. In Scotland, we need to recognise that I think there is a huge issue, a structural issue, and that structure is Westminster, and it's getting in the way of so much of the good work that is being done by the Scottish government and by industry across Scotland, who are trying to outpace in so many ways others across the UK. Of course, unless of course you are Northern Ireland, which now has access to the single market as well as the UK market with the Northern Ireland Protocol, and who seems to be speeding ahead in terms of economic growth. And that's because they have access to the single market, which of course they to remain.
Thank you, Martin. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yep. Good. It sounded like it was breaking up there for a moment. But to develop the point you were making there, the Financial Times this morning says that all of this data together will reinforce the case for the Monetary Policy Committee of the Bank of England to raise interest rates again when it meets this week. And it struck me, is that not one really dangerous in an economy that is stalling and which already relies heavily on cheap borrowing?
Mhm.
And is it also not true confirmation that economic policy in the UK, just like industrial policy in the UK, as the First Minister pointed out this morning, that these policies are just one-trick ponies which seem to have forgotten what their tricks are? Martin, can you?
Indeed, I mean, technically there is nothing wrong with borrowing as long as you have an effective, strong and resilient economic base. The problem, I think, which goes way back, maybe 40 years to the Thatcher period, is that the UK consistently, UK governments, both red and blue, if you, for example, take the Blair years. Yep, can you hear me?
Yep.
Hear me now?
Yep. Yes.
Well, hopefully that will get me back through.
There we go. We can hear you now, Martin.
Okay, yeah,
That's better.
yeah. So I just think it's a consistent narrative in British economic policy. Yeah, it is a consistent British economic policy. I think we need to consistently flag up to everyone in Scotland that it isn't going to change, and a cycle of, in which we haven't seen since the 70s in that sense, coming back again, and this kind of profoundly liberal attitude to the market and to the economy, which I think even most people involved in industry don't want to see. They want to see a more stable and a more resilient economy, which actually allows governments to borrow at a reasonable level and to maintain a decent standard of living for everybody living in a country. And I believe that's where Scotland wants to be.
Completely, Martin. Martin, I'm going to take you to a story that's just that is developing at the moment, if I may. About 10 minutes ago, the QC Jessica Simmer tweeted, the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg has granted a Rule 39 request to stop the flight to Rwanda from leaving the UK. The basis for the order is the real risk of inhuman and degrading treatment, contrary to Article 3 of the European Convention on Human Rights. And so on the one hand, that sounds like a positive step from the perspective of those who may be expecting to be offshored from the UK this evening. But by the same token, thinking of the politics of this, do you think that the UK government will comply with an order of the European Court of Human Rights? And even if it does, is that not just setting up the kind of confrontation that will delight the readers of the Daily Mail and the Daily Express?
Well, I think in terms of the second part, it certainly will delight those who are profound Brexiteers and want nothing to do with it. But if you're a signatory to these rights, then you have moral, political, and jurisdictional, legal obligation to ensure that you enforce the law. I saw some of the debate today and some commentators, these pesky lawyers, well, you'll forgive me, but these pesky lawyers are only implementing the law as passed by Parliament. And the judges are only making laws, etc., based on that as well. So, I think the UK government would be wise to step back from the edge and to reflect on the judgment and stop the flights and then seek to renew its policy in the light of that judgment and change it.
Completely. Thanks, Martin. We'll move on to the next story now because the UK government is ending the last remaining subsidies for electric cars, arguing it will free up funds to expand the charging network and support other battery-powered vehicles. In a controversial move, the government has closed the £300 million plug-in car grant scheme to new orders today, according to the Department for Transport. The main industry body said the move will leave the UK as the only big European country without any incentives for electric cars. Car makers said the decision was not a surprise, but was hugely disappointing. The government said the grants had created a mature market for ultra-low emission vehicles, helping to increase the sales of fully electric cars from fewer than 1,000 a year in 2011 to almost £100,000 in the first 5 months of 2022 alone. Battery-powered and hybrid electric vehicles now make up more than half of all new cars sold, and fully electric car sales have risen by 70% in the past year and represent 1 in 6 new cars joining the UK's roads. The Department for Transport said it wanted to focus funding on expanding the public electric charge point network, and said £300 million in grant funding will be directed towards extending plug-in grants to encourage sales of electric taxis, vans, trucks, motorcycles, and wheelchair-accessible vehicles. And that was as announced in last year's autumn statement. However, the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders said the decision to scrap the plug-in car grant sent the wrong message to motorists and to an industry which remains committed to the government's net zero ambition, at a time when new car sales have been falling. So, Martin, a consultant from Volkswagen Financial Services, said it was hugely disappointing that more is not being done to encourage and support lower-income households in the transition to electric vehicles. He went on, maintaining or increasing the plug-in grant for the least expensive vehicles to make them more affordable and to encourage manufacturers to produce electric cars at lower prices could have been a strong incentive to help adoption for this sector in the market. So is this another indication of a consistent policy approach from Downing Street during an energy price crisis? Lower income families are absolutely on their own and can expect nothing from this government.
I think it's a difficult but also interesting policy area. I think one of the big things we don't talk about is the possibility of reducing the number of cars on the road. And, in Scotland, we do have this discussion about getting people onto public transport, huge investment in cycling, etc. And I think we need to be conscious, whilst I think it's a bit crazy to try and get away from, the 300 million, because it does undermine the industry as it transitions into full electric. Um, I think we need to be also aware that there needs to be decisions about where charging points are going to be. For example, the UK government's levelling up fund. Is it being used to promote, say, hydrogen, or to promote some of these charging points, public charging points as well, as opposed to the 300 million? Where is the 300 million going? I think the industry certainly has a point around that. I think also it shows like maybe a lack of political leadership on the government's point to move further and quicker to net zero, because we know that technically the world is on fire, and one of the ways we can play our part is reducing the amount of CO2 going into the atmosphere, and one of the major producers of that are cars, and we need to reduce that as quickly as possible. So yeah, look, it certainly is an issue that the industry will find very problematic, very difficult in terms of personal usage and personal charging points. But I think we also now need to recognise that we need to be doing more, also as we're doing in Scotland, to move people, if we feel safe enough and confident enough, into public transport which is effective and joined up. And that does pose its own challenges, I think we all know. I think we should be really concentrating on that as well.
That's a very fair point, Martin. In particular, the apparent lack of political leadership across what, as you say, is a complex and many-faceted area, and one which is pressing upon us very heavily at the moment. But let us move on to the next item this evening, because allies of the imprisoned Russian opposition politician Alexei Navalny have sounded the alarm, saying that the Kremlin critic is missing from the prison he was serving his time. Most likely he is being transferred to another prison, his close associates say, but in Russia, prison transfers can take days, if not weeks, and are often shrouded in secrecy. All this time that we don't know where Alexei is, he is left alone in the system that has already once tried to kill him, Navalny's spokesperson, Kira Yarmysh, said on social media. Navalny's closest ally, Leonid Volkov, said on Telegram that the politician's lawyer went to visit him in prison on Tuesday and was told that there is no such convict here. Where Alexei is now and which prison he is being taken to, we don't know, Volkov said. Navalny, the most determined political foe of Vladimir Putin, was arrested in January 2021 upon returning from Germany, where he had been recuperating from a nerve agent poisoning that he blames on the Kremlin. And then he was handed a 2.5-year sentence for a parole violation. Then in March, Navalny was sentenced to 9 further years in prison for fraud and contempt of court, charges he rejected as politically motivated, and an attempt by the authorities to keep him behind bars for as long as possible. The judge ordered the Kremlin critic to serve the new sentence in a maximum security prison. He was supposed to have been transferred to one after he lost his final appeal. The new conviction followed a year-long Kremlin crackdown on Navalny's supporters, other opposition activists, and independent journalists, in which authorities appear eager to stifle all dissent. Navalny's close associates have faced criminal charges, and many have left the country, while his group's political infrastructure, an anti-corruption foundation, and a nationwide network of regional offices has been destroyed after being labelled an extremist organisation. Until now, Navalny has been at the IK-2 penal colony in the Vladimir region, about 100 kilometers east of the Russian capital. The facility in the town of Pokrov stands out amongst Russian penitentiaries for its especially strict inmate routines, which include standing to attention for hours. So, Martin, in terms of this story and also in terms of the wider politics in Russia, do you think, is there anything that Vladimir Putin wouldn't do to his political foes? And do you think, will this story or this development in this story, will it get more attention because of the events in Ukraine, or will it just not register with most folks here?
I mean, I think sadly it probably won't. I think people are facing some really tough issues here at home, especially with the cost of living. People will, of course, be worried about the war in Ukraine and Russia's illegal invasion of a sovereign nation state, a member of the UN. And Navalny's case, I think, will sadly, fall off the radar. And it just shows the utter dictatorial fashion in which Vladimir Putin and his cronies run the Russian state and have manipulated it to bend to their will. It is reminiscent of I think, the days of Andropov and Brezhnev. Do I think we're near the end of it? Sadly, I don't at the moment. That said, Navalny has gone missing, but some people have also been saying in recent days, so has Putin. But probably just too tired in his dacha, his big, large, huge dacha out in the forest. But I think, sadly, yeah, I think, the internal machinations and politics of the Russian Federation are less nuanced than we would think. They are brutal, they are criminal, and if your face doesn't fit, then I'm sadly, you are not going to be able to participate in that fascist state that it has become, which is a profoundly sad moment, I think, in the history of the modern Russian state in the post-Soviet period.
Brutal is exactly the word that I had in mind. Thanks, Martin. Let's look at our next item, though, because a record proportion of young people from the most deprived communities are going on to positive destinations after leaving school. Statistics show that 93.2% of pupils overall who left school last year were in a positive destination. That includes work, training, or further study 9 months later. This is up from 92.2% in the previous year and is just below the record of 93.3% set in 2017 to 18. The gap between school leavers from the most and least deprived areas achieving positive destinations narrowed to a record low of 7.5 percentage points. This gap has now more than halved since 2009-2010. The statistics also show that a record of 31.5% of young people who left school in 2021 were in employment in April 2022, with 40.3% in higher education and 18.3% in further education. The Education Secretary, Shirley Ann Somerville MSP, said, "All children and young people, regardless of their backgrounds, should have the opportunities they need to fulfil their potential. So I'm pleased to see a record proportion of school leavers from the most deprived communities going on to positive destinations." The statistics show that overall, the percentage of young people in positive destinations 9 months after leaving school is also near a record high. Given the very significant challenges posed by the pandemic, this is particularly impressive. So, Martin, is the Education Secretary correct? Are these latest figures a hint that perhaps some parts of the education sector are at least beginning to emerge from the challenges of the pandemic and get back on track to be improving the lives and the positive destinations for our young people?
I think it's a tremendous effort on behalf of everyone who works in the education profession. I'm not one keen for using the word sector, I have to say. The profession of education can be a great honour and a privilege, a vocation, as some would say, and I think those who have in the education, whether teachers or teaching assistants or ancillary staff, all levels of education have played an extraordinary role in keeping so many people in education during the pandemic, and how difficult that has been. I think we've yet to see how difficult that has been for many in the education profession, but I think their hard work, their determination, and their capabilities as educationalists certainly, I think, is bearing fruit. That's not just because of government policy, it is because of people in the front line in the education profession doing what they do best, and that's being educationalists. And I think it's something we need to really shout about louder and talk about more, whether you be teachers, lecturers in further education or in higher education, and also everyone who works in the education sector in the country.
Thanks, Martin. That's a good point. I was talking to educators last night about that precise point, and they would agree with you wholeheartedly. But let's move on to our next item, because the Westminster Abbey bell tolled 72 times for the victims of the Grenfell Tower fire as survivors and bereaved relatives began a day of remembrance 5 years on from the disaster, and demanded that the authorities finally deliver justice in the next year. In warm June sunshine, reminiscent of the day that dawned on the burning of the tower on the 14th of June 2017, hundreds of bereaved family members gathered at the Abbey to mark the passing of a period in which there has been a powerful community solidarity, but also increasing anger at the government's response and the lack of criminal prosecutions. Attending the service was Sir Martin Moore-Bick, the chair of the public inquiry into the disaster, and the broadcaster John Snow, who said from the pulpit that Grenfell speaks to the grotesque inequality with which our society is riven. He said that if political rhetoric about reducing inequality was to mean anything, those responsible must face justice. The congregation applauded after Imran Khan, a lawyer acting for some of the families at the inquiry, said assembled dignitaries were welcome at the memorial service this year, but the inquiry's revelations about what caused the fire had left them with no excuses not to deliver justice. If you do nothing in the next 365 days before the next anniversary, you will, I am sorry to say, not be welcome then, he said. In a reference to the inquiry, which has heard how materials manufacturers exploited weaknesses in national safety testing and building regulations to sell combustible materials for high-rise tower blocks, it said, "It's hard to carry on when day in and day out for the last 5 years we've had to hear just how corrupt and rotten the system is." So, Martin, first of all, we've heard what Imran Khan was saying. It's also been suggested today that victims' families are unlikely to see prosecutions begin before the 10th anniversary of the catastrophe. It doesn't sound to me like there's much justice for them.
Well, no, I mean, I was actually listening. I can't believe I'm going to say this to Jeremy Corbyn earlier on, and Jeremy Corbyn was the former leader of the Labour Party here in Westminster. Was talking how working class communities, as he said, are left, with the impact of austerity economics, and how in some ways that's led to Grenfell and so many other profoundly disastrous policy decisions, which have seen so many people either die or killed due to bad regulation and lack of enforcement. And I totally agree with him on this one. That when you don't have a building regulation standard, and I'm not saying that any of us in Scotland are perfect, but at least in Scotland we had the 2015 housing standard, which the UK government was only picking up recently in terms of basic standards for social registered social housing and also council housing. And it always, and it just beggars belief that these austerity economics has led to the cuts in regulation to allow companies to, cut away at regulation as they see it, but also to cut away at safety. And quite frankly, what we've seen with Grenfell, and now in its 5th anniversary, is the death of so many people, and that goes to the bare bones of it. Working class communities were, quite frankly, left and out and died because of the utter lack of regulation and safety when it came to cladding and housing across the UK.
Completely, Martin. And to go back to a point that you were making earlier on, it was Frankie Boyle who tweeted this morning, the first Rwanda flight on the anniversary of Grenfell says everything about the direction of travel, the direction
Mhm.
we've travelled in the last 5 years. Is Frankie Boyle right, Martin?
So many people are right on that one. Frankie's right. So many other folk are right. And the question I would often say is this where Scotland wants to be? Does Scotland want to be part of a political state which, holds its breath and says, this is acceptable behaviour for a modern democratic state? Or do we say to ourselves, actually, it's time for Scotland to regain its dignity, its liberty, and its independence, and to go about self-governance, setting forward an agenda for a socially democratic country, which sets higher standards not only for others but actually for ourselves, and that means for each other in the community of Scotland. I think the First Minister's statements this morning, as we move forward in the campaign for the independence of our country, this is the type of stuff that we need to be reminding ourselves of every day, that we can and we should set the standards for our own governance and destiny, and making sure that we invest critically in the infrastructure of our country, and that's not just in trains, planes, and automobiles, but that's in a housing stock which I represent a community, Andrew, which has some of the highest number of non-traditional housing types in Europe, because of the Second World War. Houses built
Hmm.
with tin, which have been renewed, but in another 20, 30 years are going to have to be renewed again. So we really need to be resilient, capable, and able to do that. And I firmly believe the only way to do that is an independent country with a treasury which is controlled by the people of Scotland.
Thanks, Martin. Control by the people of Scotland is absolutely right. We didn't have time to talk about the affordable homes target of 50,000, which has just been reached, but perhaps we'll get a chance to talk about that next time. As you say, given the non-standard nature of so much of the housing for the people who live in your constituency. But that was our final item this evening. In making these programmes, Broadcasting Scotland relies on the support of viewers and others who value our distinctive approach to news, current affairs, and culture. Please help us to continue to make these programmes, to develop the station, and to make new programmes for you. If you would like to support us, then please consider subscribing or donating to Broadcasting Scotland. You will find the link to do that on the screen now. You will find our appeals for assistance on Facebook and Twitter, because the urgent need for financial support has not gone away, and you'll see the article in the National this afternoon. There are other ways in which you can also contribute to our work. If you'd like to volunteer to work with Broadcasting Scotland, then please visit our website at www.broadcastingscotland.scot and send us a message there. Meantime, Hugh will be here again tomorrow with the next edition of Scotland at 7, so please tune in and join him tomorrow evening. And that's the way it is at very nearly Scotland at 8. Thank you to everyone who has been watching this evening, and a very special thanks to our very special guest, Martin Docherty-Hughes. Thanks, Martin.
Thanks a lot, Andrew. Thank you.
Now, I'm reminded that James Clerk Maxwell was born yesterday in 1831, and of course, we wouldn't be broadcasting to you, and you wouldn't be watching us without his discoveries. He was born in Edinburgh, raised near Ecclefechan, and was said to have been called Dafty when he started at school. Of course, Albert Einstein wrote that when he developed his special theory of relativity, he thought that he was standing on the shoulders not of Isaac Newton, but of James Clerk Maxwell. I'll be thinking of Clerk Maxwell as we're told over the coming months that we are too wee, too poor, and too stupid to look after ourselves. Until then, I hope that you have a very peaceful evening and can join us again soon here on Broadcasting Scotland. Bye bye.